Welcome back. Today we're skipping the absolute basics and jumping straight into the deep end of one of history's most fascinating enigmas. We're talking about why the Nephilim remain the ultimate mystery when it comes to hybrid origins. We're going to map out exactly how today's top research channels are breaking down and honestly hotly debating the bizarre genealogy of these ancient giants.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our entire journey today really kicks off with one simple yet incredibly complex question. Where did the Nephilim actually come from? This question happens to be the title of a massive hit from the Bible Animations channel, and it hooks us instantly, right? Because it points a giant spotlight at a huge blank spot in our standard historical narratives about hybrid lineages.
And to really grasp the scale of the intrigue here, just take a look at how this whole topic is framed. Giants of the Bible, the Nephilim, and the secret hidden by the church. That incredibly provocative title comes straight from the Black and White Bible channel. By calling it a secret hidden by the church, the creators are just plunging us right into the heart of the mystery. Whether you look at this as literal history or some kind of symbolic mythology, the story of these beings is treated as a suppressed truth, a hidden reality about hybrid origins just waiting to be uncovered.
Section 1. Bí ẩn về Nephilim.
Understanding the enigma.
So, looking across all our source material, the definition of the Nephilim goes way beyond the basic giants you might remember from Sunday school lore. These channels focus heavily on their nature as a total anomaly. We're talking about a highly debated hybridization that sits really uncomfortably right between spiritual entities and earthly beings. They basically represent a blending of different realms, and that idea deeply fascinates modern researchers and drives so much of the conversation online today.
Section 2. Bí mật bị che giấu, a history suppressed.
Which brings us to this incredibly bold declaration from the Bible Animations channel. They state, "Theologians call this heresy. I think they're wrong." Honestly, this quote is absolutely pivotal for our explainer today. Mainstream academia and traditional theology usually shy away from taking hybrid giant beings literally, often tossing the whole discussion into the heresy bin. But these digital platforms, they're pushing back hard. They aren't treating the hybrid origins of the Nephilim as some forbidden topic, but rather as a fascinating, unsolved mystery that deserves rigorous, serious analysis.
And man, the public demand for this kind of analysis is just staggering. Take the channel Unraveling the Scriptures, for example. They recently polled their massive audience, over 500,000 subscribers, asking what cinematic movie they should make next. And one of the top contenders? Nephilim, the hidden story of the Bible movie 2026. The fact that this specific topic beat out standard biblical figures for a full-on cinematic adaptation proves just how deeply this mystery of hybrid origins resonates with people today. It's huge.
Section 3. Dấu vết người khổng lồ. Tracking the giants across YouTube.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the exact same ancient mystery can be approached from completely different angles to help us understand it better. On one hand, you've got Bible animations using hand-drawn visuals to break down the complex mythological and theological debates. But then, on the flip side, you have channels like Black and White Bible and Unraveling the Scriptures who treat the subject with the absolute gravity of a documentary expose or a cinematic historical epic. Put them together, and they give us this amazing comprehensive toolkit for analyzing the whole enigma.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the specific phrasing Bible Animations uses in one of their titles. God created a superhuman for one purpose. When looking into the Nephilim, some sources theorize that these giant beings weren't just random anomalies or accidents. The idea of ancient superhumans roaming the earth adds this really thrilling layer to the investigation. It suggests their hybrid origins were actually part of a highly specific, perhaps even violent, engineered design.
Section 4. Thế giới trước cơn lụt. The era of the giants.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because it's a wild ride. We start at the beginning, the creation era. But as we move forward into the pre-flood era, bam, we see the sudden appearance of the Nephilim. They completely dominate this specific window of time in the ancient texts. And then we hit a hard stop with the Great Flood in the days of Noah. Looking at this timeline, it's pretty clear that the existence of these hybrid giants is inextricably linked to the moments right before the greatest cataclysm in all of ancient lore. But what was that pre-flood world actually like? Well, drawing from the Gospel Scriptures narrated by the ambient audio channel The Sleep Bible, we hear these words from Matthew about the days of Noah. In the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. I find this passage so fascinating. It paints this eerie contrast, right? You have normal, completely oblivious daily routines happening right alongside this population of hybrid giants, all while an apocalyptic judgment is literally looming right over their heads.
And that brings us to a massive documentary collaboration between Black and White Bible and the Ex-Bible Files, which they titled The Shocking Truth About Noah's Flood You Never Knew. The narrative these investigations put forward suggests that the flood wasn't just some random, crazy weather event. It was a direct, targeted response to the intense corruptions of the pre-flood world, and chief among those corruptions, the unchecked proliferation of the Nephilim. Basically, the flood is framed as the ultimate reset button on a hybrid experiment that had gone completely out of control.
Section 5. Lời giải trong nguồn gốc. The hybrid mystery unveiled. So, the crucial point is synthesizing exactly what all these platforms are telling us. Here are the main origin theories presented across our sources. First up, their true origin is viewed as a secret deliberately hidden by early church institutions. Second, they're seen as the result of a controversial merging of different realms. Literally, a hybridization of divine or angelic beings with earthly ones. Third, there's a theory they were beings engineered for a very specific, though heavily misunderstood or dark, purpose. And finally, just talking about these hybrid lineages remains a topic that mainstream scholars frequently label as theological heresy, which, let's be honest, only fuels even more independent investigation.
The Nephilim really do represent the ultimate historical anomaly. They are a puzzle piece of hybrid origins that completely challenges conventional theology and history alike. But if the truth of these ancient giants has been obscured for this long, it leaves us with one lingering, highly provocative thought. What other ancient historical mysteries might still be hidden out there, just waiting for us to uncover them next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking those big questions and keep exploring.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer, because today we're looking at something truly extraordinary. We're exploring the narratives of two of history's most epic, larger-than-life figures, Elijah and Samson. Based on ancient text and even some recent cinematic interpretations, we're going to unpack the massive psychological and theological burdens placed on those chosen to stand alone against the tide of history. It's a fascinating pattern of power, human frailty, and redemption. Actually, it's a pattern we see echoed later in the epic story of David, or as it's often revered, Quokdai vua David vidai, the great life of King David. But that incredible legacy starts right here, with two radically different men.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive contrast we're hit with right out of the gate. On one side, you have Elijah, often called the prophet of fire. His power, it wasn't in his muscles. It was this commanding spiritual authority. He was like a voice of distant thunder that could literally shut up the heavens. And then on the other side, you have Samson, widely known as the strongest man in the Bible. His defining trait was unmatched, supernatural physical strength. I mean, lions literally fell before him. So we're looking at absolute spiritual dominance going head-to-head with absolute physical power.
To make sense of their parallel journeys, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We've got 6 key stops: the call in the dark, power and authority, the darkness of solitude, betrayal and fall, justice and salvation, and finally, their timeless legacy.
So, let's kick things off with part 1, the call in the dark. Because to really understand these men, you have to understand the era that forged them.
You see, neither of these guys emerged during times of peace. Not even close. They were unlikely deliverers called into severe, suffocating darkness. For Elijah, it was a profound spiritual void left by Queen Jezebel's false idols and her ruthless suppression of truth. For Samson, well, his darkness was a crushing physical weight, 40 brutal years of Philistine occupation. Understanding this tension is absolutely crucial because it shows exactly why their absolute brands of power were so desperately needed in such a fractured world.
Just consider the sheer weight of this promise regarding Samson's origins. Before he was born, he was chosen. Before he could walk, a promise had already been spoken over his life. This wasn't some job he could casually apply for or just walk away from on a bad day. No way. This was a heavy, inescapable Nazirite vow placed on him from the very womb. He was set apart before he even took his first breath, irrevocably destined to carry the liberation of his people. And that early promise brings us to Section 2, Power and Authority, where we witness the breathtaking rise of these chosen deliverers. The feats these men accomplished are, for lack of a better word, legendary. Samson discovers his terrifying power by tearing apart a roaring lion with his bare hands. And later, he takes down an entire army of 1,000 warriors using nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. It's raw, unrestrained physical dominance. Elijah, meanwhile, operates entirely in the realm of the miraculous. He confronts hundreds of false prophets on Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven to consume a drenched altar. Yet at the same time, he wields this tender, spiritual authority to raise a widow's son back to life.
Picture this cinematic scene with Elijah, completely surrounded by a hostile king's soldiers. He simply says, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven." What's so profound here is the absolute certainty behind his words. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't panic. It's a total contrast to the sheer anxiety of Ahab's forces. He didn't fear earthly kings because his authority came from a much higher source, and the physical world had no choice but to bow to it.
But here's the kicker. For decades, these two stood completely alone. They were the sole defenders of a desperate, fractured nation. Samson single-handedly judged his people and held the Philistines at bay for 20 whole years. And Elijah? He operated as a solitary prophet without a crown, without an army, fearlessly dismantling the entire corrupt, systemic empire of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel.
But carrying the immense weight of a nation on your shoulders, that takes a severe psychological toll. Which brings us to Section 3, the darkness of solitude. Take a second and ask yourself, what happens when the strongest men are broken by their own humanity? We've talked about their supernatural feats, but they weren't unfeeling machines, right? They were flesh and blood human beings, and the burden of their divine callings was unimaginably heavy.
The greatest battles these men fought weren't actually out on the battlefield with armies or on mountains with false prophets. They were fiercely internal. Elijah's journey was marked by silent persecution, fleeing for his life, and a profound, crushing solitude in the harsh wilderness where he literally begged for it all to end. Samson experienced a deep, weary desire for just a shred of normalcy. After 20 years of constant conflict, he sought peace and intimacy in the valley of Sorek. That intense isolation that inherently comes with absolute responsibility, that is the true defining struggle in both of their stories.
And it's exactly in that deep human vulnerability that both men encounter their greatest crises. Let's move to Section 4, Betrayal and Fall.
Let's walk through this rapid, tragic escalation of Samson's downfall. It starts in the valley of Sorek, where he meets Delilah. Seeking rest and trust, he instead finds a snare. He's betrayed by the woman he loves, which leads to the devastating loss of his supernatural strength and, tragically, his sight. He ends up bound in the prison of Gaza. The irony here is just inescapable. The man whose physical might could shatter entire armies was ultimately brought down by his total inability to conquer his own internal desires.
Now contrast Samson's deeply personal betrayal with the systemic political betrayal in Elijah's story, specifically the incident with Naboth's vineyard. King Ahab wants the citizens' ancestral vineyard. When he's told no, Queen Jezebel orchestrates this deadly corrupt scheme, using false witnesses to execute an innocent man just to steal his land. A total betrayal of justice. But stepping right into this empire of corruption is Elijah, fearless as ever, arriving at the literal scene of the crime to declare absolute divine judgment on the king. These betrayals push both men to their absolute limits, stripping away everything they'd relied upon. And that leads us into Section 5, Justice and Salvation.
When Elijah confronts King Ahab in that stolen vineyard, he delivers this heavy-hitting, chilling truth. I found you because you sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. It's a stark reminder that the voice of the prophet does not bow to crowns. It does not negotiate with earthly power. Even when the king thought he had completely gotten away with murder in the shadows, Elijah was right there to ensure that ultimate justice prevailed in the light.
Meanwhile, for Samson, salvation looks very, very different. It's in the absolute darkness of captivity, blind, broken, and humiliated in Gaza, that Samson finally discovers what true strength has always been. His story highlights a profound truth. Immense physical strength might be enough to save a nation, but it is only pure humility that can save a soul.
Samson's ultimate victory comes through absolute surrender. It all begins with one final, sincere prayer to God, recognizing for the first time where his power truly originates. This is followed by one final act of obedience as he pushes against those pagan pillars. And it culminates in the massive collapse of the Temple of Dagon. He gives up his own life to fulfill his calling, creating this moment of profound redemption born entirely out of total surrender.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how different yet equally miraculous Elijah's climax was. He strikes the Jordan waters with his mantle, crossing on dry ground alongside his disciple. And then the heavens open up. A chariot of fire and horses of flame descend, and Elijah is taken up alive into a whirlwind. He didn't taste death. He was taken completely beyond human reach, perfectly matching the miraculous, unearthly nature of his entire life.
Both of these incredible journeys lead us to our final section, timeless legacy. What are we supposed to actually take away from all this?
The poetic differences in their departures are just absolutely stunning. Samson, the man of physical might who faltered under his human desires, finds his ultimate victory through a sacrificial, agonizing death among his enemies. Elijah, the man of unwavering spiritual authority who stood firm against corrupted kings, is honored by ascending alive in a whirlwind of flame. Their unique exits flawlessly match the distinct divine callings they each carried.
And that brings us to the core takeaway for today. When the strongest fall, they discover their strength was never truly their own. These aren't just ancient myths meant to entertain us. Not at all. They are profound, enduring studies of grace, of the unimaginably heavy burden of a calling, and of humanity's ultimate dependence on something far greater than ourselves.
So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to reflect on. Where does true strength really come from? Is it unmatched physical power, the ability to conquer lions and armies? Or is it found in the humility of the human spirit, that quiet authority to speak truth to power and surrender to a higher calling? Take a moment to think about that as you look at your own life. Because whether we're looking at Elijah, Samson, or even the sweeping epic of Quote Vuda Vid Vidai later on, the pattern holds true. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible truths hidden right there in these ancient texts.
Picture a vast, desolate wilderness. The scorching sun is just beating down on a man who, literally moments ago, called fire from the sky and single-handedly altered the course of a nation. But now, he's running. He's absolutely terrified. He collapses under a fragile broom tree, just completely empty. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're exploring the cinematic soul of digital biblical narratives. We're going to look closely at how modern digital storytelling is completely reframing ancient texts. It's like we're watching a movie, transforming these simple historical accounts into profound, intensely personal explorations of the human psyche.
Okay, let's dive into this with a desperate plea. Enough, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. This is the prophet Elijah in absolute freefall. I mean, think about it. What actually happens to a hero's psyche right after they save the world? The adrenaline fades, the crowds disperse, and suddenly they're left totally alone with the crushing weight of their own vulnerability. It's a dramatic, heavy crash from total invincibility to absolute despair.
Section 1. Digital Age Epics Reinventing Stories. So, we are currently witnessing a massive shift. Content creators on platforms like YouTube are completely reinventing how these ancient stories are told. They're stripping away that dry textbook delivery you might be used to and replacing it with something deeply cinematic. We're talking high-definition visuals, ambient soundscapes, and this incredible movie trailer-style narration that focuses entirely on the internal human experience. And the modern appetite for this kind of emotionally heavy content, it's literally staggering. The Abide app's sleep stories have garnered 28 million views on just a single video. The Sleep Bible pulls in hundreds of thousands of views for these multi-hour cinematic narrations. And channels like Unraveling the Scriptures, they're racking up massive engagement in mere weeks with 4K movie-style biblical films. Millions of people are actively seeking out these immersive, emotionally heavy narratives. And you know why? Because they offer a clear mirror to our own modern internal struggles. So what exactly are we looking at here? A cinematic sleep epic is essentially a long-form, highly atmospheric journey. It focuses intensely on the psychological and spiritual journeys of ancient figures, and it's specifically designed to induce deep rest and relieve modern anxiety. These creators don't treat ancient figures as untouchable, perfect icons. Instead, they treat them as profoundly flawed, exhausted human beings. And that deeply human vulnerability, that is exactly what makes them so comforting to an overworked, stressed-out modern audience. It really sets the perfect framework for our two main character studies today.
Section 2. Power and Fear.
And this brilliantly illustrates the tension. One moment, Elijah the Invincible stands completely alone on Mount Carmel against hundreds of false prophets, calling down a violent, consuming fire from heaven. I mean, it's the ultimate external spectacle, right? But then, within 24 hours, after hearing a single death threat from Queen Jezebel, this exact same man is running an absolute breathless terror into the wilderness. He just collapses. He literally begs to die. The contrast between his explosive external miracle and his immediate, crushing internal vulnerability is just staggering. Elijah's psychological freefall is rapid. It goes from hours of unshaken conviction to minutes of a miraculous high, crashing instantly into 40 long days of despair out in the desert. He ends up hiding in a cold, isolated cave at Mount Horeb. And here, this is where the cinematic storytelling of these digital epics really shines. Because when healing finally comes to his broken psyche, it isn't in a violent earthquake, it isn't through a raging fire, it's in a gentle, intimate whisper. The ultimate peace is found internally, very quietly. Section 3. The Blind Hero's Trial. So, the crucial point is right here. The greatest battles are not fought with fists. They are fought within the human heart. Modern digital creators are entirely reframing Samson. He's no longer just a one-dimensional superhero. His story is being told as a deep, psychological tragedy. We all know the classic tales of his supernatural strength, sure, but these modern epics explore the incredibly heavy burden of a calling he didn't even ask for, his profound internal weakness, and his ultimate desperate surrender. Just imagine this physical powerhouse, defeating armies with the jawbone of a donkey, tearing lions apart barehanded. It's total, unmatched external dominance. But now strip all of that away. Picture him blind, broken, and humiliated in a Gaza prison, losing his sight, losing his physical power. It actually forced him to stop relying on his external strength. In the absolute pitch-black darkness of that prison, stripped of absolutely everything that made him super, Samson finally had to confront his own soul. Let's move to and see how this builds throughout his life. Samson's story is this dramatic, sweeping arc of loss and redemption. Chosen at birth, victorious in youth, and then tragically betrayed in adulthood. This progression leads directly to the crushing captivity of his broken phase. But in his final moments, as he's pushing against the pillars of the temple, he isn't just asking for strength to fight. He finds this incredibly deep inner peace and a profound internal submission that he simply never possessed when he was victorious. He essentially had to lose the entire world to find his soul. Section 4. Healing Through Sleep, a Modern Ball. So how do these ancient, heavy, psychological descents actually connect to you today? Well, channels like Abide and Holy Harmony take these exact stories, but they wrap them in ambient peace, gentle rain sounds, and these incredibly soft, slow, rhythmic voices. They specifically highlight themes of freedom from fear, weaving scripture together with calming, cinematic melodies. The entire goal here is emphasizing internal rest over the loud, external chaos of our daily, modern lives. They take the raw burnout of Elijah or the crippling anxiety and betrayal of Samson to validate our own modern exhaustion. It's fascinating. They're using ancient trauma to effectively treat contemporary insomnia and overthinking. When you strip away the noise of the day, when you finally lie down in the dark, you aren't looking for the loud spectacle anymore. You don't need the thunder. You don't need the consuming fire, that chaotic, relentless energy that drives the daytime world. That is exactly what we are all trying to escape. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it all comes down to just a gentle whisper. This is the exact psychological mechanism at play here. Modern listeners are tuning into these multi-hour sleep epics because they are desperately seeking that exact same whisper Elijah found in the cave, just to quiet their own inner noise. Section 5. The Power Within, the Internal Experience. This right here is the ultimate shift from external spectacle to internal experience. Elijah's ancient burnout finds stillness, which is literally relieving the insomnia of millions of people today. Samson's betrayal finds a beautiful surrender, soothing our modern anxiety. Listeners who feel like they just have to control everything in their waking lives are learning how to let go in the dark. It mirrors the audience's experience absolutely perfectly. It really is ancient psychology serving as a modern balm. These digital epics strip away the flashy miracles to reveal the fragile, exhausted humans underneath. They tell these stories like a movie, focusing entirely on that rich internal experience to remind us that the greatest battles and the absolute deepest peace happen internally. So think about your own life today. When the external noise of your life finally stops, what does your internal whisper sound like? Thanks for exploring this with us. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and pay close attention to that whisper.
Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are opening up what might honestly be the ultimate historical cold case. We're diving deep into a massive core question. Why do the Nephilim remain one of the greatest mysteries in human history? Or, as our focus today perfectly puts it, Daisao Nephilim Labi Amcharm Lixu. We are going to be looking at ancient texts, completely lost eras, and an enigma so incredibly profound that it is literally dominating modern digital media right now. So let's just jump right in.
Right off the bat, where did the Nephilim actually come from? If you spend, any time at all looking into ancient scriptures or historical mysteries, this is the exact hurdle you're going to hit.
It's one of the most frequently asked yet universally tough questions out there when it comes to ancient texts. We've got these really brief, tantalizing mentions in historical documents, but absolutely no complete backstory. It's kind of like finding a single fascinating puzzle piece sitting right in the middle of a massive historical board, and we just do not have the edge pieces that connect it to everything else.
So just to make sure we're all entirely on the same page here, let's define who we're actually talking about. The Nephilim are most commonly understood and translated simply as the giants of the Bible. Now, depending on which ancient translation you're looking at, they're described as fierce warriors, fallen ones, or these beings of just immense size and power who walked the earth in antiquity. That is our baseline for today's investigation. We know the name, and we definitely know the legend. But as you'll see in a minute, that legend is full of some massive holes.
Section 1. Mystery of the Giants.
The real problem here is this huge juxtaposition of what we know versus what we just don't know. On one hand, we have these very concrete, culturally pervasive narratives, think Noah's flood, and a highly detailed biblical timeline that spans literally thousands of years. But on the flip side, the actual origins of the Nephilim are practically a void. You have these beings just dropping into the historical narrative with zero explanation of their lineage, their culture, or what they truly were. It's such a striking contrast, right? You have hyper-detailed ancient history sitting directly next to an absolute unexplainable secret.
Moving into Section 2, World Before the Flood. The ancient texts actually paint a really vivid and, honestly, somewhat chilling scene of the era of Noah. The text reads, "For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking until the flood came and took them all away." Think about that for a second. You have this oblivious, thriving ancient world that is completely unaware of an impending cataclysm. It wasn't some barren wasteland. It was a heavily populated, highly active society, and it was entirely wiped out.
When we trace the timeline of that destruction, we go straight from the pre-flood world right into the shocking reality of the global flood itself, ending up in a completely washed-away aftermath. The absolute crucial point to remember here is the physical reality of a global flood. If you are out there looking for archaeological evidence, ruins, or the bones of some giant civilization, well, a cataclysm of this magnitude literally washes away the physical evidence. The earth was wiped clean. The secrets of these giants were buried under miles of sediment and water, leaving us with nothing but a few fragments of text.
Section 3. The Hidden Secret.
Now, a recent, incredibly popular digital source titled its deep dive with this: Giants of the Bible, the Nephilim and the Secret Hidden by the Church. Now, to be absolutely clear here, we are looking at this totally impartially. We aren't endorsing this as some factual historical conspiracy. But, as an analytical tool, this title is incredible. It perfectly encapsulates a huge theory driving modern curiosity right now. The idea that this information hasn't just been lost to a flood, but actually intentionally concealed by human institutions over the centuries.
So that forces us to ask a pretty critical question. Is the lack of hard data regarding the Nephilim simply because they're just a symbolic myth, or is it the result of deliberate historical suppression? Did ancient editors and later religious authorities actively remove the details because they were just too bizarre, too frightening, or maybe they just didn't fit into a neat theological narrative? It's the kind of question that turns every single reader into a historical detective, trying to read between the lines of what is actually printed.
Section 4. Timeless Fascination. When you actually look at the viewer data from massive channels dedicated to biblical animations and histories, the trends are pretty astounding. When they post your standard, well-known Bible stories, they pull in a medium level of viewership, solid but expected. When they post videos about the deep, hidden meanings of stories, those views jump significantly higher. But the highest engagement, and we are talking by a massive margin here, comes from the tough questions and the biblical mysteries. Topics like the origins of angels, demons, and yes, the Nephilim, draw millions upon millions of views. The audience is out there voting with their clicks, and they are overwhelmingly drawn to the unknown.
And content creators are absolutely responding to this demand. Channels like Unraveling the Scriptures have already produced these massive cinematic hits, things like the story of the Nephilim, the world before the flood, and Sodom and Gomorrah. And what are audiences clamoring for next? A full-length feature slated for 2026 called Nephilim, the Hidden Story of the Bible. This immense thirst for uncovering these hidden historical chapters is literally driving major independent media production right now.
So, what is the crucial point we should all be taking away from this? Why does any of this actually matter today? Well, it matters because humanity is fundamentally obsessed with what has been hidden or lost to time. We don't just want the stories we already know. We have this innate, driving desire to uncover the erased chapters of our own history. The Nephilim represent the ultimate blank space on the map of human origins, and our minds simply cannot resist trying to fill that space in.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to chew on today. If a global flood washed away the physical evidence of giants and centuries of editing potentially smoothed over the rest, what other ancient truths remain hidden right in front of us? This innate human drive to uncover our lost past is exactly Tai Sa Nephilim, Labi Antong Lasiri, exactly why the Nephilim remain such a profound mystery in history. Thank you so much for exploring this historical cold case with me. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and never stop looking for those hidden stories.
Okay, let's just jump right in. In this explainer, we are plunging headfirst into a deeply dark, intensely chaotic time in ancient history. The historical sources we're looking at lay out this epic narrative, and honestly, it centers entirely on one profound concept: explaining the journey of faith and analyzing the absolute obedience of a man named Elijah, especially when he's facing completely insurmountable trials. We're looking at a time when the land of Israel was plunged into complete spiritual darkness, corrupted by idol worship, pushed by a ruthless king and queen. And right in the middle of all this chaos, a voice rises from the desert. Not a politician, not a king, a prophet. Just think about the sheer audacity of this decree for a second. Elijah literally walks right into the palace of King Ahab. And keep in mind, Ahab is a king who has completely abandoned God for Baal, an idol who was specifically supposed to be the god of weather and fertility. So Elijah doesn't ask for a meeting, he doesn't soften his words at all, he just delivers this jarring, immediate sentence. He shuts the heavens. No rain, no dew. Boom. It's an unbelievably intense way to establish the stakes. He is drawing a massive line in the sand, showing this audacious faith in a totally corrupted nation. The so-called god of rain has just been publicly challenged, and a nationwide drought officially begins. Section 1. Obedience in Isolation. Now, you'd probably think that after marching in, confronting the king, and declaring a nationwide drought, Elijah would step out into public glory, right? Maybe lead a massive rebellion? Nope. His immediate reward was a strict command to go hide in total isolation. And look at the completely illogical steps he was commanded to take. First, go hide at a tiny, drying brook called Cherith. Second, rely on ravens to drop off your bread and meat. Guys, ravens are scavengers. It's literally like relying on ancient, winged delivery drivers who are famous for stealing food, not giving it. And then third, when that brook inevitably dries up because, the very drought he prophesied is happening, he gets sent to Zarephath. This is a foreign land, right in the heart of Queen Jezebel's home turf, and his instructions are to find a destitute widow who is literally gathering sticks to cook her final meal. Absolute obedience so often means overriding our own human logic. From a normal perspective, none of this makes any sense at all, but it requires trusting a divine plan you just can't see yet. But here's the thing, that hidden obedience leads to an impossible promise. When Elijah asks this starving widow for her absolute last piece of bread, he tells her the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry. And because she obeyed, and because Elijah obeyed, the impossible actually began. The jar never emptied, the jug never ran dry. Day after day, completely in the shadows, miles away from the palace, they experienced daily miracles. What we see here is that true faith is sustained and forged in the absolute harshest of droughts, not in the spotlight. Section 2. Fire on Mount Pearl. Okay, so 3 long, absolutely devastating years of drought pass by. The fields are just dust. The rivers are cracked earth. And right here, the energy completely shifts. Elijah is commanded to step out of those shadows and directly challenge the 450 prophets of Baal. This is the ultimate showdown on Mount Carmel. Picture this. On one side, you have the prophets of Baal in the scene of desperate, bloody chaos. They are frantic, screaming, dancing, literally cutting themselves from morning until noon, just begging their God to send fire. But crickets, just silence. Now on the other side, Elijah operates with this quiet, focused reverence. He rebuilds the altar using 12 stones for the tribes of Israel. Then, just to make it completely impossible from a human standpoint. And remember, they are still in a catastrophic 3-year drought. He has the altar soaked with 4 jars of precious water 3 times over. He offers a simple, obedient prayer. And the response? A literal torrent of divine fire falls from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and yep, even the water. It's this undeniable, dramatic sign of who actually possesses true authority. But wait, the story doesn't actually stop with the fire. The land still desperately needs rain. Notice the persistence here because it's absolutely crucial. Elijah doesn't just ask God once,
He bows down and sends his servant to go look at the horizon 7 times before this tiny cloud, just the size of a man's hand, finally appears. This brilliantly shows us that absolute obedience isn't just one big, dramatic, one-time act, It requires relentless persistence, real perseverance and faith. Section 3, the whisper of God. Now, right after this monumental triumph, the tone just shifts so dramatically. We enter this phase of severe emotional whiplash. The drought is broken, the false prophets are defeated, but then Queen Jezebel sends a single terrifying death threat to Elijah. And the guy who literally just called down fire from heaven, he absolutely spirals. Honestly, I love this part of the story because it so perfectly humanizes Elijah. It shows us that public victory can so often reveal this deep private loneliness. Look at the timeline. On day 1, he flees in pure terror deep into the wilderness. By day 2, he just collapses under a broom tree in total despair, literally asking to die. He has reached his absolute breaking point, where exhaustion completely eclipses his faith. But what does the text actually show us? God doesn't crush him for being afraid. Instead, an angel gently wakes him up, feeds him freshly baked bread and water, and sustains him. And strengthened by that grace, he walks for 40 days until he reaches Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And this brings us to what is easily one of the most fascinating moments in the entire narrative. Elijah is hiding out in a cave, and God tells him to go stand on the mountain. Pay close attention to the sensory contrast here. It's wild. First, this violent wind literally tears the mountains apart, but God isn't in the wind. Then a massive earthquake splits the ground right open, but God isn't in the earthquake. Then comes an intense, consuming fire, but God isn't in the fire. I mean, we always expect the divine to show up in these destructive, highly visible displays of power, right? But after all that chaos, there is just a gentle, quiet whisper. And it's in that intimate whisper that God meets Elijah, restores his soul, and hands him his next mission. The true power of faith is so often found in our quietest moments of listening.
Section 4, absolute obedience. So, if we synthesize everything we're seeing here, it all boils down to one core thing: absolute obedience. It means obeying the divine call when it makes absolutely zero logical sense, like, going to the dried-up brook or the starving widow. It means obeying when you are completely, utterly emotionally depleted, like we saw in the wilderness. And it means obeying when it demands confronting deadly earthly power, like facing down Ahab and Jezebel. Elijah's true power wasn't magic, not at all. His real power was his unyielding submission to God, even when facing the toughest trials imaginable. And we actually see this exact dynamic play out again later in his life. So there's a new king, Ahaziah, who seeks answers from a false idol. Elijah intercepts the messengers to rebuke the king. Well, in response, the furious king sends heavily armed soldiers to go arrest him. A captain and 50 men march up, demand he surrender, and they are instantly consumed by fire from heaven. So the king sends a second group of 50. Same thing, they are consumed. Finally, the third captain approaches, but instead of demanding anything, he kneels, he begs for his life, and his 50 men are spared. This just so vividly illustrates the sheer, ridiculous imbalance of earthly military power versus heavenly authority. Heaven actively defends the person walking in absolute obedience. Section 5. The legacy concludes. As we approach the final chapter of Elijah's journey here on earth, we have to look at how this kind of obedient life actually finishes. Because a life of absolute obedience is never just about one person. It's always about the passing on of a mission. Elijah doesn't experience a normal death. As he's walking with his successor, Elisha, the very man God told him to anoint during that quiet whisper in the cave, by the way, the heavens literally open up. A chariot of fire and horses of fire separate the two of them, and Elijah is taken up in a whirlwind right into eternity. But as he goes up, something falls down. His mantle, his cloak, the absolute symbol of his authority and his calling. It falls directly to Elisha. This ensures we understand that a life of absolute obedience secures a legacy that totally outlives us. The fire didn't go out, folks. It was just passed on. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The story of Elijah shows us that God doesn't just choose the strongest, but rather the most available, the people who are willing to listen to the whisper and obey without reservation. So looking at Elijah's standard of faith, I want to leave you with this question to ponder for your own journey. The mantle is at your feet. Are you obedient enough to pick it up? Think about that as you process everything we've covered today.